We're pleased to have Elwynn Taylor come down from Iowa State and visit us on the topic climatology. When we're looking at talking about drought, he's one of the first individuals, or was the first individual to come to mind, indicating, you know, if we're going to do something with the climate, we need to see if we can bring Elwynn down. And so we're pleased that he's able to join us. Elwynn grew up in Utah. His undergraduate degree was a combination of botany and meteorology. Then he completed his PhD at Washington University in St. Louis, and again a combination of meteorology and botany. And so again, a very good combination to really think about the effects of climate on crop growth. And so we're pleased to have Elwynn here, and we'll welcome him to the stage.
Thank you very much. Glad to be with you. The weather has always been exciting to me. I know it's not exciting to everyone else, but it's exciting to me. And I do know this, that there is nothing in this world more important than agriculture. If it were not for agriculture, we'd have no culture at all. All culture is based on agriculture. Look at the nations that have risen and fallen based on whether their agriculture was successful or not. That's the way it's been as long as we've had history. That's the way I think it will always be. And there's nothing more important to agriculture, whether it's cattle or crops, than the weather. The weather is the uncontrollable factor, the main one. There are others, of course, but it is the main one. But if we can't manage the weather, we can manage the risk associated with the weather. I want you to keep, at all times when I'm talking about the weather, this is a risk management meeting, keep the management of risk in mind. It's the most important thing. I was asked to give the keynote address to the annual meeting of the European Union Agriculture Association. And I said, I'll be honored to. What would you like me to speak about? The vicious cycle. I said, oh, great. What is it? Simply, there's nothing more important to agriculture than the variability of the weather. The weather affects agriculture, the weather affects us all. That isn't the vicious part of it, however. The vicious part is that agriculture in turn influences the weather, the climate itself. The weather influences me, my population. Agriculture influences the population. We couldn't have the population and the cultures that we do in this world without agriculture. The ups and downs of agriculture determine all of the other things. And of course, people create agriculture. So all of these arrows have a point on each end. And that's what makes it a vicious cycle. Agriculture influences the climate. Climate influences agriculture. Climate influences people, and people influence climate. It was 50 years ago, on February the 8th of this year, that a noted scientist, the chairman of the President's Science Commission, reported to the President of the United States, President Johnson, that there is no question our excessive use of fossils as fuel has changed the composition of the atmosphere. And the President of the United States called a special session of Congress that met the next week, where he charged Congress to do something about this. And they began to do such. People have said to me so many times, we have to do something about our changing climate. Why won't the United States give the world leadership we need it? I just quoted the president of a South American country, well, the president of Colombia, looking me right in the eye when he said that. I rather humbly replied, "Sir, remember we have to have a translator in the middle. I can understand some Spanish, but I can't understand Colombian Spanish. Even the Spanish people from Argentina speaking to the Spanish-speaking people from Colombia have to have a translator. But, sir, we're doing our best, and I think we're giving the world leadership, but I don't think the world fully understands. In the United States, we are not too interested in telling people, you must do this. We're saying, I believe this will work better. I believe you might want to try this. You'll make more money in the short run. You'll be ahead in the short run as well as in the long run. It's sort of been the goal that we hoped would be set by the world to limit our use of energy per person to what it was back in 1970. One nation has achieved that. The United States. This year, last year, the year before that, the energy consumption in the United States of America has been below the per capita energy consumption before 1970. How did we do it? Incentive helped. When the President addressed Congress, it's the 50th anniversary of that. It's a good time to see how it worked. There are two ways. One, conserve energy. Don't use so much where you don't have to. Number two, use energy that's other than fossil energy. That is the problem. So here we were in full recognition of the energy problem, and a president that said two ways to handle it. What did he do? The first thing, of course, was conserve it. That was the easy thing. How can we do that? Why, Mr. Taylor, I'll tell you what you can do. You can put better insulation in the attic of your home. And you can deduct the cost of it from your income tax. Well, I thought that was great. We improved the insulation in our home. I didn't even think about that I didn't make enough money to pay income tax anyway. But the world did it. At least the United States did that. And we improved the windows for heat loss. And we bought a new refrigerator that was more energy efficient. We bought a new deep freeze that was more energy efficient. We got a washing machine that wasn't more energy efficient than doing it by hand, but it made us feel better. And the nation was cut its use of energy, at least its wasteful consumption of energy, significantly. Now, what about changing from the fossils? That's the problem. Our energy hunger for fossils. Energy. Coal is so nice. Natural gas is so nice. So many forms of fossil energy are just so excellent to use as fuel. Liquid fuel for a vehicle, solid fuel for a plant, whatever you need it for, it's just so good. But as long as we burn fossils faster than the earth creates new fossils, the carbon in the atmosphere will increase. And the things that go along with it, that I'm not going to talk about, in detail at least, will be there. And that is the whole center of what we hear about on the press of the climate change problem. It has to do that we've changed the composition, the percentage of carbon dioxide in the air. And that just briefly, not a long time ago at all, seems like just a couple of years, when I was a junior in high school, 1959, just a brief time back, I remember the chemistry teacher saying, "How much carbon dioxide is there in the atmosphere?" Nobody in the class responded. "Mr. Taylor?" 312 parts per million, Mr. Kellett. "That's right. I thought you'd know." I don't know why he thought I'd know, but I knew. Now I ask my students the same question. How much carbon dioxide in the air? Oh, about 400 parts per million. We're a third of the way to doubling the carbon dioxide in the air since I was in high school. That brief period of time, at least brief speaking geologically, and that is having an effect. That is the problem. That was recognized as the problem 50 years ago. Recognized and with an assurity that that was the problem. Now, why am I talking about it today? You didn't come here to talk about climate change or the vicious cycle associated with it, except that it's influencing every one of us in this room. Some because we're students, the rest because we're involved directly in some aspect of agricultural production or agricultural consumption, or both to a large extent. What is the solution to my energy-hungry friends that they would burn less carbon as fuel? Well, I was told, get an energy-efficient automobile. I rented an automobile on a recent trip to the West. I flew to the West. I rented an automobile when I was there. They said to me, "Which automobile do you want?" I said, "The least expensive one." They said, "Well, it's right over there." And I looked over there and I said, "I mean the one that I'm not going to have to pay you very much to use. It can just be a little compact." I said, "That's it. It's not little and compact. That is a muscle car. That is a brand new Mustang. How come it's the least expensive?" Our rent's too high on it. Nobody rents them. So they said, get some miles on them. So we're giving you the best price on that. So I rented a Mustang. And I had two granddaughters in the community, both in the university, both single. Oh, they couldn't think of anything better than to ride around campus in a brand new Mustang and see all the attention. Oh, my granddaughter's married now. Not because of the Mustang, but it helped. We are not interested in curbing the amount of energy we use for transportation or for tractors. But there was a time when my family converted from horsepower on our family place to tractor power. We got these little Fords, little Model Ns. And this was 1952 when our family went from draft animals to little tractors. And our acreage that we used to produce a cash crop doubled. It was using 1/3 of our farm to power our farm equipment. That is, to feed the horses that pulled the bar to cut the hay, pulled the rake, that plowed the field, took 1/3 of our land to feed them. I had a saddle horse. I didn't have a saddle, couldn't afford a saddle, but I had a saddle horse. I rode that horse 3 hours every day, 7 days a week. In the morning, I'd take the cows to the pasture. After that, I'd deliver the newspaper. My mare would stop at every paper box in the township. And if they'd stop taking the paper, I'd have to reach down and give the box a thump so that the horse would think I'd put a paper in, then she'd move to the next place. Then she had the rest of the day off to follow me around, whatever I was doing, until we went and brought the cows back. My little mare was supported by 1/3 of an acre that Dad had given me to take care of my horse. Just like it took 1/3 of the farm to feed the draft animals. All of the kids at school had bicycles. They'd ride their bicycles to school. I'd ride my mare to school. No saddle, no bridle. I'd just get on her. She'd take me to school. I'd get to school. I'd slip off of her. She'd go home. When school was over, maybe she'd come back and maybe she hadn't. And I'd walk home. Dad, I would like a bicycle. Can't afford a bicycle, son. I'd like Santa Claus to bring me a bicycle. Santa Claus can't afford a bicycle, son. But on Christmas morning, in my Christmas stocking, there's a little slip of paper sticking out of the top of it, along with the oranges and banana and things that come in a Christmas stocking. And it said, 1/3 acre just beyond your chicken run. I had 6 hens. My 6 hens laid 5 eggs every day. I took my 5 eggs down to Non's Market, and he gave me 4.5 cents per egg, and then he sold the egg to people that bought eggs for some price, and I was happy with that. In fact, I was so happy with that I told Dad, I'm going to increase my chicken flock from 6 hens to 30. And he said, then you'll lose money. I said, what do you mean? Look how much money I'm making. He said, son, you're stealing the feed. And he was willing for me to take a scoop of wheat out of the bin every day to feed my chickens, my 6 chickens, but he wasn't willing to feed 30 of them. He knew the grain was worth more than those eggs. Well, so I kept my 6 chickens. Well, anyway, this 1/3 of an acre that was just beyond, I planted an area in it about the size of this room to sweet corn. Well, part of it was to pole beans, snap beans. And we had a university nearby, and I picked my sweet corn, and I picked my pole beans, and I put them in my little red wagon, and I pulled it up to the university where people did not have gardens, and they bought my sweet corn, and they bought my snap beans, and I bought the best bicycle Sears and Roebuck could provide. And the first day of school came. And I said, no one's going to tease Elwynn anymore. They're not going to say, Elwynn has to ride his mare. Because I've got the best bicycle in the township. And I waited till I heard the first bell. And then I rode my bike to school, and I knew everybody'd be watching. And everybody was. And they were all pointing and they were all laughing. And I looked over my shoulder and there was my mare following me to school. One-third of our land went to feed our horses. Now we know that if we are going to power our tractors and our automobiles on ethanol, it is going to take one-third of the cultivated land. Just the same as it used to when we powered our farm on biofuel. And that also tells us that we can do that. And now you know why I'm talking about it today. Because we're approaching and will probably reach one-third of the cultivated acres. And maybe a third of the forage acres. Not sure on that. For the production of liquid fuel. And that has changed the balance for you. Just for my interest's sake, by raise of hands, how many people in this room produce corn? I want to see the hands. Keep your hands up if you produce more corn than you consume at your place. A little more than half the hands stayed up. Thank you. Raise your hands if you consume corn, even if it's the same people that raised their hands before, by feeding it to cattle or something. Okay, that's more than produced it. There was a time in the 1950s and before when the leading dairy state in this nation was Iowa. And then it changed to another place. Why did it change? Because Iowa could produce corn for cows and send it over to the neighboring state, over to Wisconsin, for their cattle to eat more profitably than we could raise corn and feed it to our own cattle. And the people in Wisconsin were better off to import corn from Iowa, where they could get a better yield per acre than they get in Wisconsin. They were better off to buy their corn and emphasize their pasturing, their foraging, and their dairy. We've kind of found the same thing in parts of Nebraska and down to Texas and western Kansas. And I see these great feedlots that do better to import their feed than to try to grow it. They're ahead of the game there. So we've got people that buy feed, people that grow feed, but they're also growing food and they're for people, and they're growing ethanol. And it starts to be a concern for a lot of people. And a legitimate concern. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that, except to say that this one thing, biofuel or renewable fuels, this would be the biofuel combined with the wind energy and the other forms that we will call renewable energy, can do the job that people are concerned with on climate. And I'll leave it right there. I don't know how many times I told my children, quit complaining about the winter. You should have seen the winters when I was a kid. Ah, Dad, don't dad me. I have data. Look how far down those points go on the left-hand side of my chart. That's how harsh the winters were. On the left side, see how high up the points go. Those were the mild winters. You guys, going about 2/3 of the way toward the right, you guys have got it mild. Your harshest winters are like they used to be when they were mild when I was a kid. Now look at the extreme right. And my grandchildren telling their dad, Well, Dad, we've got it rough in the winter, just like Grandpa did. You had it easy. And that's right. Over about a 40-year period, we go from rough winters to averaging out milder and then back. I don't know how long it's done that or how long it will in the kind of climates that we have, but that's what it does. If you read at the top, it says that the heavy line drawn through there is the standardized North Atlantic Oscillation Index, NAO index. That is, it has to do with where does that warm water from the Gulf Stream go when it leaves the Gulf of Mexico. Does it hug close to the U.S. coast, or does it head for Portugal? And it doesn't switch back and forth on the hour, or on the week, or by the month. It switches back and forth over a period of, guess what? There it is. And the winters in England are usually just exactly the opposite of what they are in New England and to here. Once you start getting to the really high plains, and we're into at least a ways beyond Lyman, Colorado, then winter's controlled by something else. But this side of the Colorado border, this is the control. And it's an interesting thing. This is the anomaly of ocean temperature. Not the actual ocean temperature, the anomaly. How much warmer than usual is it? How much cooler than usual is it? And if you see red, it's considerably warmer water than usual for the ocean. If you see blue, it's considerably cooler. Off of the west coast of South America, right along the equator, you see a red dagger coming out. Moving further to the west, the international date line, in fact. That is warm water. When that warm water is complemented by blue north of Australia, cold water, we have El Niño. If it was the other way around, red north of Australia and blue off the west coast of South America, then we would have La Niña. Where the water is warm, the warm air next to it rises, causing a low pressure area. And where the water is blue, the air is sinking because it's cool down there. And we have high pressure area. And when it reverses, the high pressure and low pressure are in different places. And when this is strong, like it is right now, and like it was the other way around in 2010 and 11 and into 12, then the low pressure and the high pressure are reversed. And this is a big enough deal that if this is normally a high pressure, now it's a low, then this one up here that was normally low is now high, and it switches around all the way up to the Arctic Circle and down to the Antarctic as well. And all the high and low pressures are in a different place. And that is how El Niño affects the weather of the world. It moves around the centers of high and low pressure and the things associated with it. Now, we've been hearing a lot about El Niño this past several weeks in the popular press, seeing it on TV, reading about it in the papers. I want an honest raise of hands. How many have heard about all of the things of a potentially strongest El Niño of the century? If you've heard of that, raise your hand. I want to see if that's getting through to people. How many of you, raise your hand again, are concerned about that? Get concerned. It's influencing your money. If not your weather, your money. Here in the Midwest, El Niño is our friend. El Niño's the friend of the Midwest farmer. It's even a better friend to the Argentina farmer. El Niño tends to be a Christmas event. In fact, it comes about every Christmas if you're right on the coast, west coast of South America, but they're not strong enough for us to pay attention, so we don't call that an El Nino year. It's about 1 out of 4, 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7 years that we call an El Nino year when it really is changing these things clear up to us. They call it El Nino because if it's even a weak one, it will be strongest around Christmas time. El Nino, written in a formal way in the Spanish language, means the little boy. That is, it refers to the Christ child. Christmas. You give someone a Christmas present, you say, Merry Christmas. You go to this part of the world, you give someone a Christmas present, you say El Nino. It means the same thing. El Nino around Christmas time. The normal El Nino that comes most every year brings the 1 inch, maybe 2 inches of rain that they get for the whole year in that part of the world. But a strong one, like is going on now, might bring 40 or 50 inches of rain, where they normally have 2 or 3 for the year. 40 or 50 inches of rain is no way to run a desert. It washes out highways, it destroys cities, there are landslides. It is a disaster of too much water. And those are the years that we talk about it as an El Nino up here. Those are the years that it will probably influence the drought that's been going on in Southern California, for example. Well, enough with that. An effect of it. October 2009, where it is blue, we are having a wet October. 4 or 5 times the normal amount of moisture from East Texas up to Wisconsin and Minnesota. And everywhere you see the blue and the purplish color in the middle of the blue. And look at the lower picture, October of 2010, which will persist through 12, where it is dry, where you see the red. We have almost seen a reversal in the 48 states of the moisture pattern and its deviation from normal, due to moving from El Nino to the second strongest La Nina in recorded history. Recorded history is less than 200 years. So it's not a big history, but still, that was the strongest, second strongest. When was the strongest? Well, the last time that it did exactly this thing, which was in the mid-1950s. I see a couple of you are old enough to remember what went on with the weather in 54 and 55 and 56, as it was a disastrous drought in Texas, worse than the one in 2011, and then went to disastrous drought from here to Ohio, and then to California. That was the last time that it was worse than this. And of course, that's the main reason they see that a strong El Nino now may be the strongest of the century, certainly will be of this century, but of the past 100 years, because we just came out of the strongest La Nina. And even after the La Nina was done, its effects persisted, because to change all those great high and low pressure persisting areas takes a while to switch around. And so that is what went on. Now there are some graphs in the form of pie charts. And where you see the little green wedge in the upper right of the top one, top two, and the upper right of the bottom one being a more dominant thing, that represents the chance of having a record high yield of corn in the United States. With a La Nina, it's rather scant up there at the top, about an 8% chance. We have had record high corn yield for the Corn Belt as a whole during a La Nina year. And the red is the probability of a drought. And you see in the top right pie chart, there's a big red area. And blue is below trend, but not yet a drought. What a wonderful country you live in. People all over the world argue We're having a drought. No, it's not a drought. Yes, it's a drought. No, it's not a drought. We don't argue in the United States. We have Congress. And the Congress of the United States passed a law. And we know that if dry and hot conditions have reduced the production of your county to 90% of normal or lower, cut it by 10%. That's called decimating the crop, cutting it by 10%. We know that if the weather has decimated your crop, that is a drought, and your county is entitled to whatever relief the USDA provides that year. Don't mix decimated, cut by 10% below trend, with devastated. There are no synonyms in English. They mean kind of the same thing, but devastated would be decimated twice or more. Comes from old Roman languages, by the way. Look at the bottom. With an El Niño going on, as opposed to a La Niña at the top and neutral in the middle, that green area, chance of a record high yield, is large, and the yellow area, that's 70% of the circle. This is an El Niño year. This says there's a 70% chance of an above trend line corn yield for this nation. This year, it's an El Niño year. Of course, that still leaves you with a 30% chance of being in the blue or the red. That can happen, but the odds favor above trend line yield. And what are we headed for right now? The USDA estimate just came out of what the yield is expected to be above trend. People say, well, it looks pretty bad around our place. A guy in Ohio called me and says, is that right? I said, that's right. Well, how come the USDA surprised us with it? They didn't. Every week they tell you the crop condition. How much of the crop is rated in good condition or excellent condition? Add the two together for your district or for your state or for your nation. The percent of the crop acreage in good or excellent condition, if it comes out above 50%, you're headed for an above trend line yield. If it's below 50%, you're headed for a below trend line yield. And it may change next week when the next estimate comes out, but you can track it. Yes, I've just given you $1 million. Just by paying attention to that and knowing which side you're on and what the odds favor. And after all, risk management is moving with the favoring of the odds. Let's go back to La Niña. That will be the purple line, representing the jet streams, for example. Look at the great undulations as they go around the planet. That is volatile. Look under El Niño. The jet stream almost makes a circle around the planet. By the way, there's more than just one jet stream here, representing only one for La Niña and El Niño conditions. But yes, there are 4 of those, but you're looking at one. They all behave the same, and you get more volatility of weather with La Niña. Climate risk in agriculture is likely to be greater during the coming 20 years than it has been during the past 20 years, during the past 18 if we go before 2012. It's likely to be greater. The management of risk is of increasing importance to you. All of your risk management practice of the last 20 years has been just that, practice. Now get serious about it. Because if the weather keeps doing in the same pattern what it has done for the past 300 years, you're in for the next 20 years of high volatility of weather. You see the area on my chart that is blue, shaded in blue. Those were the years when we were dominated by La Niña, and things were extreme. And the red marks going up were the El Niño years, in this case, and those were the good yield years, the high production years. And you see that whole area that doesn't have blue shading in it. Those are the years of the optimist doing well. I think it's all going to turn out all right. And usually it did. Look at all the red going up into the green. The years of the success of the pessimistic farmer were the ones before 1975. And I might add, the ones going on now. Well, things aren't too good and they'll probably get worse. And that's what went on. And you see the little risk wheels that go with those areas. And when you see the big red area and the blue area taking more than half the circle, then we have the chance of crop shortage in the Midwest. Annual corn yield for this county. Look at the variability from year to year. The black dotted line in the middle is the trend line. The trend line is always for 30 years. That is the best trend to use. Some people talk about the 5-year trend, some about the 10-year trend. They say, what should we use? There's good scientific reason to use the 30-year trend. The USDA always uses the best straight line drawn through 30 years of yield for your county, for your crop reporting district, for your state, for your corn belt. They always use the 30-year record to come up with the trend. Unless the line doesn't look good, then they use a different number of years. Also for a very good reason. But note, as you get to the right of the word years at the bottom of my graph, you see suddenly the corn yield of, I got the right county up there? Yeah, I do. Of your, if this is your county from here a little bit west, the corn yield of this county has become more extreme, poor and better than it was for the previous 20 years. Why did the corn yield suddenly become volatile? We went from the white area to the blue area. From the white area to the blue area. And how long are we going to be in that blue area? 25 years. Of volatility. And you've seen the beginning of it on your chart. This is what we work with. This is what we manage for. Iowa. The whole nation's corn looks a lot like Iowa's. Somebody said, does that mean the weather for the whole nation is like Iowa's? I said, no, that means that Iowa is the important state for producing corn. Seems like it used to always be Illinois and Iowa having a contest, as it were, of which state would be the highest in corn production. And then one year Nebraska won, and one year Minnesota won. And how can that be? Climate must be changing. They've always been good farmers in Nebraska, but they just couldn't deal with the climate that they had, even though they irrigate. And suddenly, Nebraska came out on top. But even more surprising, Minnesota came out on top once. If somebody had asked me 20 years ago, will Minnesota ever be the top state in corn production? I'd have said, not if the past is any judgment of the future. And now they've done it 4 times. And this year maybe number 5. The shift that we're seeing in climate is favoring areas north of the north border of Nebraska and west of Interstate 35. Well, it's partly favoring you, but it's mostly favoring Minnesota and the Dakotas and northwest Iowa. Look at what's happened to the property values. Those are the areas where the corn production has been the most consistent and has had the fastest rate of increase in yield per acre. And that's where the property values have gone up the fastest. The economists say it might be something else, Elwynn. I said, yeah, it might be. But I know these two things are true. That's where the prices of the land have gone up. That is where the production has gone up. And that is the reason they're changing climate. It's favoring those areas. Now, I've drawn some little brackets in here. And you'll notice inside that center red bracket, we have consistent corn yields for the state of Iowa. They were consistent for the nation during those years. That's 18 years of consistent yield. It included 1967. 1967. A corn salesman came into my office, and he said, Elwynn, what do you think of our new hybrids? I said, well, they're just great. Why do you mention it? And he says, just look at the consistency. Now go outside that center red box. Look at the variability we had of yields in the 40s and the 50s. They were up and down all over the place. Now they're consistent and just increasing with the fine corn breeding accomplishments we have. We're not dependent on the weather anymore. I said, do you believe that? Yeah. Well, outside of that center box to the right, I couldn't even find the gentleman in 1974. When we began 25 years of high volatility. High volatility, but sometimes we went up and almost touched my dashed black line. What is that dashed black line that we didn't even come close to back there in the 60s and the early 70s? That is the yield, in this case for the state of Iowa, if we have weather as good as it can get. On the years with the best weather, the yield or Iowa will hit that dashed line, and I have a chart like this for every state and for them all put together. And whenever the yield does not go up and touch that dashed black line, it's the weather's fault. Not necessarily for your farm. It might be because you let your son plant for the first time in his life. At least that's what it was on our place one year. And I was the son. But for your county, for your district, for your state, if the weather's as good as it gets, you hear up and hit a dashed line. It looks much like the one you're seeing here for Iowa. And during the years of high volatility, such as you see in the center outside of the red boxes, you may go up and touch that line. But also you'll have years when you only get half of that yield in your state and also in your nation. Those are the years of volatility. I've got them labeled. It says stable period number 3 right there in the center. Stable period number 2 at the extreme left side. You go over there another 25 years of erratic, and there will be stable period 18 years of consistent yields, number 1. And that's as far back as we have kept corn yield records in this country. 18 years of consistent yield, 25 years of erratic yield, 18 of consistent, 25 of erratic, 18 of consistent, and 2012 was year 1 of 25 years of erratic yield. Sometimes great, sometimes poor, always saying manage the risk. The risk of high yield, the risk of low yield. Manage it. It needs managing because the weather is going to do what the weather does. You'll be hearing things about the climate change effect and that it is making the weather more erratic. Maybe it is. But even if the climate were not changing, the weather would be more erratic for this 25-year period. I've looked at the tree rings, the annual growth ring of trees, for all the information I can get from that. For the Midwest, we've got pretty good information going back another 300 years. Trees don't persist a long time here like they do some places. We can go back more than 800 years on both coasts, where they have things like redwood trees and cypress trees that when they fall in the mud, they don't rot away. You can pull a log out of the mud, take it to the sawmill. You can count the rings, see the good years and the bad years. Here we don't have that advantage, but we do know this. We know when the worst year for raising crops in Illinois and Iowa was in the 1800s because people lived there and they wrote it down. It was 1847. We know when the worst year was in the 1900s. It was a Dust Bowl, 1936. We know from the tree rings what they looked like in those 2 years. We go back and look for light tree rings in the 1700s. And in the 1600s. And you know what we find out? That the worst year was 89 years before that. And 89 years before that. Well, not to the year. I think it was 91. And I think it was 85. But it averages 89 years. And it's a close average. I've just told you, if we're going to have Dust Bowl-like conditions this century, when are they most likely? Let's see, that was 1847, 1936, 2025. You two guys with white hair don't need to write this down. You guys need to write it down. We've entered the volatility period that will likely include the harshest years of this century. Is this an opportunity to sell out of this crazy business you're in? Or to manage the risk and take advantage of it? What do I mean take advantage of it? How do those guys in Chicago make any money in the commodity markets? Volatility. If I hadn't known that from my fourth grade teacher, who said, students, in this world of market economy, if you want to be rich, you buy things when they're inexpensive, and when their price goes up, you sell them. Well, I figured Miss Hatch knew everything. And as a few years went by, I got beyond fourth grade, I started thinking, if Miss Hatch is so smart, why is she teaching fourth grade? And then our county library burned down. And they said, we're going to have a bond election, bond vote about building a new library for our county. Miss Hatch said, how much will the library cost? I'll build it. And she built a new library and stocked it with new books. And she hadn't inherited any money from anyone. She just taught fourth grade because she loved fourth grade children. Maybe that was her only problem. The other things seemed to work out all right. We are in an economy where if you sell things that you have when they're expensive and buy them when they're inexpensive, you're operating like the market in Chicago. They buy and sell from second to second and minute to minute, and how can a farmer compete with volatility? The first time I was asked to speak to the Thursday seminar at the board, to the directors of the board, they said, Dr. Taylor, you've got an hour. We want you to speak to us 15 minutes, and then we'll ask questions for 45. So I told them what I'd prepared for 15 minutes, and they asked questions for 45 minutes. And they were good questions, and they came fast, and every question had a word in common. Volatility. If I hadn't known from this hatch that your opportunity for wealth depends on how you handle volatility, I knew it for sure that first time I spoke to the directors of the Board of Trade. That's all that they cared about. Of course, I already knew that because I knew that when I look at my little computer at what corn's trading at, that's what it was trading at 10 or 15 minutes ago. So they can take advantage of the volatility, not me, unless I'm willing to pay the price of having it up to the instant, like they do. Well, what about me and my cattle I feed? And my corn that I produce and sell, and my beans? I can't compete on a minute-to-minute volatility and make any money in the market and be sure of it. No, I can't. But they can't compete with me on an annual volatility, nor can they compete with you on annual volatility. They're thinking in terms of seconds and minutes and weeks. You're thinking in terms of years and patterns. And when the USDA comes out with their crop yield estimate, which they started doing in it's either 64 or 66, I forget which. They come out with a crop yield estimate every month for every major crop after it's once reached pollination. And they also publish their track record, how accurate they are. And since they started doing this in the mid-60s, the USDA for corn has been correct 4 times. And I don't know how many farmers have said, what good is that? They've only been right 4 times. What a useless estimate. Except that the markets move toward their estimate every time. Oh, something can come up to change the track, like a big change in the world conditions, so the value of the dollar changes. But let's say that the value of the dollar isn't changing. None of these world things are happening. A war's not starting. Maybe that's asking too much. But if we're allowing for these things, now we're talking about, is the USDA right on their yield like they've been 4 times? Or are they wrong? Well, they're wrong. They've only been right 4 times. What 4 times were they right? Read the fine print in the report. Based on our observations of 12 days ago of the crops in every county in the Corn Belt, this will be the yield if we have normal weather from the day of observation until harvest. If we have normal weather from the day of observation to harvest. How many times since 1964 have we had normal weather from the day of observation, from the end of June, 1st of July, 1st of August? Have we had normal weather till harvest? How many times has that happened? 4. And those are the 4 times they were right. They give good information. And it's consistent. They do it the same way every time. And you are a farmer. You know if the USDA estimate is too high because the weather is worse than normal for corn. Or if it's too low because the weather is better than normal. You know that better than anyone. What makes Elwynn think that we're so smart that we know that? 500 of your kids in my weather class every semester for 8 years. I got wondering, with 500 kids sitting there in front of me, They're in different groups. Some of them are engineers. That's their major. They think they're the smartest people at the university. Some of them are education majors. They're going to be our next generation of teachers for our children. Some of them are agriculture majors. Some of them are fine arts majors. The engineers never came out the top grade as a group. The education majors never came out as the top grade as a group. I had every meteorology major at the university take my class. They're our next generation of weather forecasters. Well, you know how they came out. Every semester, the top group were the ag majors. And it didn't matter if it was ag economics or farm management or livestock production, animal science, or agronomy. Didn't matter. Why did the agriculture majors do the best? Home schooling. Those of you raised on the farm, what did you talk about when the family got together for dinner? If Junior wasn't in trouble with Mom, all he heard about was what the weather's doing to us. And off he went to college knowing two things in this world are of prime importance: being polite to Mom and the weather. Of course he gets the top grade in weather class. He knows what's important. That's what you know. It's important. It's your livelihood. And now your livelihood is called risk management. Management of the risks the weather is putting on your crop. That's simple. Now, here are some numbers you can write down if you want. And you see in the upper right corner it says Wisner. He's the one that put the dollar values on here. This is this year's risk wheel. This risk wheel says that there is a 70% chance of an above trend line yield in the U.S. Corn Belt. I just looked at this week's report of the percent of the acres in Kansas that are in good or excellent condition, and in Nebraska, and in Iowa, and in Missouri, and, well, I looked at them all. True, this year's got several states that have 48, 42% of the acres in good or excellent condition, and all the rest have more than 50% of the acres good or excellent. And all the rest can be expected, if nothing goes wrong from this week on. We'll know week by week as these estimates come out. We'll know that all of these states are likely to be above the trend. The trend is 165. That's the bottom of the circle. 165 bushels the acre for this nation. If we have a trend line yield, the supply and demand estimations right now say corn will be worth $3.95 while you're out harvesting, and that is the Chicago December futures price. If we have a yield comes out at 163.5 bushels, while you're out harvesting, the corn will be selling on December contract for $4.20. It's 158. Now we're down into drought. It'll be $5.55. Today, when I looked just before coming over here this morning, corn was selling on the December contract for $3.79.5. What are they expecting? They're expecting 170 bushels to the acre. That isn't why I said in my information that's on the internet that I expect 170 bushels the acre. I calculated it separate from that. And I don't think they're following my calculations. I think these are two independent methods coming out to the same value. That we're likely to be a little bit slower yield than we had last year for the Corn Belt, bushels to the acre, but still well above the trend. And there's the prices that you work with, at least if you want to. For soybean, now you notice, for this county, the soybean is more volatile here over all those years. It's not consistent like the corn is in this part of Kansas. It's more volatile than the corn is. But still, you might say that the right-hand third of the chart is more volatile than the left, just as it was markedly so for the corn. And there are the likely yield values, the most likely yield being 45.5 bushels and $9.80 beans November contract during bean harvest. Leave that on this picture long enough for those of you that are writing it down, because I don't know if you can get any better values than those from Dr. Wisner. You might can get better ones for the percent chance of what the yield will be. But at the top of the charts, notice that there's a very small number and a very large number. The smallest yield that we could conceive of is 23 bushels the acre for soybean. The highest is 59, with conditions if they're ever as good as they ever get. It's like all the pencils are still now. Nope, one's still writing. Has anybody got any questions on those charts? You see how to use those in your risk management? Judge your risk management by it. Imagine Elwynn pulling up in my little pickup truck. I used to have a pickup truck, I don't now. This is a made-up story. Imagine me with my little pickup truck with 100 bushels of corn in the back, and I pulled it into the elevator, and the co-op manager comes out and says, "I see you've got corn in your pickup, Elwynn." Looks like about 100 bushels. Exactly 100 bushels. He says, "I'll give you $4.70. And I said, "Okay, take a third of it." "Thought you wanted to sell it all." "I do want to sell it all, but not for $4.70. Because, why do you want to just sell a third of it? Because there's a 70% chance that when I come back with the rest of it next month on this same day of the month, there's a 70% chance you'll offer me more. So take a third of it. Take the third that's likely to go down in price. I'll keep the 2/3 that's likely to go up. Or if it was the other way around, I'd sell him 2/3 and I'd keep the third that was likely to go up in price. My advisor for buying and selling grain and on my sell signals and buy signals says, kind of move it out over a period of time. I want to know how much I should use. What percentage should I sell? I'll just kind of trickle it out. No. Buy or sell the grain that's at risk, depending on whether you're a buyer or a seller, and you'll have an advantage. Who has a question about anything? Yeah.
Do you foresee weather predictions getting better?
Are the weather predictions getting better? Since so many of those predictors are my students, yes. But yes, we are getting better at the weather predictions. We are learning something about it. We've gone from 84% accuracy on the 4-day forecast to 92. That's getting better. And it's even leading the European model, contrary to what some of the press you might see. So yes, it's getting better. It's getting better in Europe and here. We are improving on weather forecasts. Thank goodness. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, what is going to happen to the drought in California? El Niño brings typically a wetter than usual wet season, and the wet season for California is winter. And it brings a wetter than usual wet season. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to flood California, Southern California, but it may. The north edge of this El Nino wetter effect is the southern counties of Oregon, or maybe up around Mount Shasta in northern California. North of that, El Nino brings a drier winter. Some of you saw the movie, some of you are old enough that you remember the movie, Red Skies Over Montana, about the smoke jumpers. The smoke jumpers start their season in Montana or the forests of Arizona. The federal government only has one setup of these guys. Where do they start them? They start them where the fires will be. It depends on if it's an El Nino, the fires will be starting in the spring in Montana. If it's La Nina, the fires will be starting in Arizona. I hope that answered your question. Yes, sir.
What's the chance that the climate change in the last 80 years will change that historic 89-year pattern?
What is the chance that it will change the 89-year pattern because we're overriding all of these things with man-made climate change? A lot of the people working on that say there's no doubt about it. It will override it. When? Sometime. I don't think it's overridden it yet. But probably it will. I think they've got good logic behind that, but they don't have a good date. Because they don't know if the effect is 4% or 8% or 2%. But they're calculating it on 4 because that's the average of what they don't know. Other questions?
What do your models show for the next 90 days during the harvest period?
What do the models show during the next 90 days? The only thing that the model is good at for 90 days from now is looking at the average, and I already showed that picture. We expect it to be closer to normal. Not extremely dry, not extremely wet, not extremely hot, not extremely cool. Closer to average for the Corn Belt. Other question? Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. I wish you the very best.